Hey, fourth graders, Mr. Alton here. I'm going to be reading today's book, and today's story is called Parrots over Puerto Rico. It's written by Susan L. Roth and Cindy Trumbore. The collages are by Susan Roth. This story will tell two stories. Part of it is about the history of Puerto Rico and the story of the parrots that lived on the island until they became nearly extinct in the 1960s. One of the main messages I want you to try to take away from this is that some animals are endangered due to the actions of humans, nature, and or other animals. People can work together to change the plight of endangered animals. So some problems are complex and require creative solutions. So keep that in mind. I'm also going to have you go to the activities once you're finished listening to the story, and there will be a couple questions that I'm going to have you answer. They're more comprehension questions just to make sure that you understood the story and we can get some feedback from you. All right, so here is the story, Parrots over Puerto Rico. Above the treetops of Puerto Rico flies a flock of parrots as green as their island home. If you look up from the forest, and you are very lucky, you might catch the bright blue flashes of their flight feathers and hear their harsh call. These are Puerto Rican parrots. They lived on the island for millions of years, and then they nearly vanished from the earth forever. This is their story. Long before people came to Puerto Rico, hundreds of thousands of parrots flew over the island and the smaller islands nearby. Iguaca! Iguaca! The parrots called as they looked for deep nesting holes in the tall trees. Down below, waves from the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean washed the island's white sand beaches. Delicate orchids and wide-spreading ferns, tiny tree frogs, kapok trees bursting with sea pods, and big, scaly iguanas covered the island. Iguaca! Iguaca! The parrots called as they flew to Sierra palm trees to eat their dark, bitter fruit. Around 5000 BCE, people came to the island in canoes from lands to the south. These people planted corn, yucca, sweet potatoes, peanuts, and pineapples. When they looked up, they saw the bright blue flashes of flight feathers. More groups of people came. The Tainos arrived around 800 CE. They hunted the parrots for food and kept them as pets. Tainos gave the parrots a name, Iguaca, after their harsh call. They gave the island a name too, Boriquen, or Boriquen. Iguaca, Iguaca, the parrots called when hurricane winds blew down the old trees where they had their nests. After the hurricanes passed, the parrots flew through the treetops to find new nesting holes. Christopher Columbus sailed from Europe to I'm sorry, I'm going to probably mispronounce some of these words or names of different places, but he sailed from Europe to Boriquen in 1493 and claimed the island for Spain. Soon Spanish settlers were planting crops on the island and building houses and schools with wood, bricks, and stone. Each time hurricanes destroyed their homes and schools, the settlers rebuilt them. The Spaniards called the parrots Catoras, and they gave the island a new name, Puerto Rico, or rich port. In the treetops, the parrots searched for mates. The new pairs of parrots sat on branches, bowing, calling back and forth to each other, and fluffing their wings and tails. Each pair raised one family of chicks every year. Now, people from many other parts of the world came to live in Puerto Rico. In 1513, Africans were brought to the island to toil as slaves under the hot sun and fields of sugarcane and other crops. More people came from Spain too, and they married Tainos and Africans. They all called themselves Boricuas, people of Boricuen, but they were still ruled by Spain. Iguaca, iguaca, the parrots called when red-tailed hawks chased them in the treetops. The parrots flocked together to protect themselves from the hawks. For centuries, people from the other countries in Europe tried to capture Puerto Rico. These countries wanted to control the deep harbor of San Juan, the capital city, where merchant ships and warships could be launched. The Boricuas protected their island. Starting in 1539, they built a fort that grew and grew until its walls were 15 feet or 5.5 meters thick. For hundreds of years, no country was able to take Puerto Rico away from Spain. Iguaca, iguaca, the parrots called when they found that their nesting holes had been invaded by creatures brought to the islands by settlers. Black rats from the settlers' ships climbed the tall trees and ate the parrots' eggs. Honeybees that had escaped from hives swarmed into the parrots' nests. In 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. The war was really about Cuba, another of Spain's colonies. But the fighting spilled over into Puerto Rico. Thousands of American soldiers landed on the island and began battling Spanish troops. Spain lost the war and lost control of Puerto Rico. The island became a territory of the United States, and in 1917, Puerto Ricans became U.S. citizens. Iguaca, iguaca, the parrots called as the forests where they made their nests were cut down. The parrots began to disappear from places where they had flown for millions of years. By 1937, there were only about 2,000 Puerto Rican parrots in the Liquio Mountains to the east. A few years later, the parrots were living in just one place, El Yunque, a tropical rainforest in those mountains. After Puerto Ricans gained American citizenship, many of them moved to the United States. Those who stayed in rural parts of the island built houses and farms in the areas where parrots had once lived. Many of the parrots' tall, old trees were made into charcoal to use for cooking fires. And people still hunted and trapped the parrots. In the 1950s, birds called pearly-eyed thrashers moved into the rainforest and tried to steal the parrots' nesting holes. Like clever thieves, these birds enter places where other birds are struggling to live and compete with them for nest sites. The parrots fought the thrashers, jabbing at them with their sharp beaks and defending their nests with harsh cries. But the parrots had now too many enemies and too few trees. The flock became smaller and smaller. By 1954, there were only 200 parrots left. Puerto Ricans elected their first governor, and the island became a U.S. Commonwealth, not a state, not an independent nation, but something in between. The people argued, should their island remain a commonwealth? Should it be a state? Should it be independent of the United States? Everyone had a different idea. But all were proud to say, Yo soy Boricuan. I am Puerto Rican. The flock of Puerto Rican parrots became even smaller. By 1967, only 4 parrots lived in El Yunque. Iguaca. Did I say 4? I'm sorry. I'm going to reread that. By 1967, only 24 parrots lived in El Yunque. Iguanca, Iguanca, the parrots called as they looked for some place, any place, to find food and nesting holes for their chicks. Puerto Ricans looked up and saw that their iguancas were almost gone. People had nearly caused the parrots to become extinct. Now people started to help the parrots stay alive. In 1968, the government of the United States and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico worked together to create the Puerto Rican Parrot Recovery Program. Its goal was to save and protect the parrots. The first part of the plan was to create this is a tough word I've never seen, aviary. So let's try to figure out what that is. The first part of the plan was to create an aviary, a place for parrots to live and raise chicks. That must mean what aviary means, a safe place for parrots to live and raise chicks. Parrots squawked as scientists with long-handled nets gently lifted eggs and chicks from their nesting holes. The scientists always left at least one egg or chick in each nest to do so some birds could continue living in the wild. 1973, Liquio Aviary Yonke. Incubators in the aviary kept the eggs warm. The Puerto Rican parrots raised in captivity had no experience as parents. So Hispaniolan parrots helped raise the chicks. These parrots came from the nearby island of Hispaniola. They are like cousins of Puerto Rican parrots, but are not as rare. Once hundreds of thousands of Puerto Rican parrots flew over the island. By 1975, only 13 parrots were left in the rainforest. The worried scientists built special nesting boxes and put them in trees and areas where the parrots were likely to nest. The parrots inspected the nesting boxes and then moved in. These nesting boxes were deep and dark, like the nesting holes Puerto Rican parrots find in the wild. A bird sitting at the top of a box could not see all the way to the bottom. Pearly-eyed thrashers like to see the bottoms of their nests, so the thrashers left the parrots' nesting boxes alone. Wild parrots squawked as scientists gently placed chicks from the aviary into the nests so the chicks could learn how to live in the wild. In 1979, the very first chick raised in the aviary flapped out into the wild nest into the rainforest. The scientists worked hard to keep the parrots healthy, both the captive and the wild birds. One chick was rescued from the wild after its wings were badly damaged by gooey slime inside its nest. The scientists rebuilt the baby parrot's wings using old, discarded parrot feathers, pins, and glue. Then they watched the parrot use its new wings to fly for the first time. By the end of 1979, there were 15 captive parrots. Most had come from eggs and chicks taken from wild nests into the aviary. Hurricane Hugo roared through the treetops of Puerto Rico in 1989. Iguaca, Iguaca, the parrots called as the winds blew down many of their tall trees. The hurricane wiped out crops and wrecked buildings and homes. In the aviary, the scientists worried about all the parrots. What if other bad hurricanes blew down more trees? What if the aviary was damaged? Iguaca, Iguaca, a group of parrots squawked as scientists moved them from Liquio aviary to a new aviary in Rio Abajo forest. The forest is less humid than El Yunque, and many parrots had once lived there. Now there were two safe places for captive parrots to live and raise chicks. Rio Abajo Aviary opened in 1993. It had some challenges. Thunderstorms sometimes caused the incubators to lose power. The scientists found generators that kept the power flowing in the incubators. The scientists also tried some new ideas. They kept more aggressive pairs of parrots away from gentler ones, so the gentler birds would not be so frightened. They also caged young parrots with adults, so the birds could see how adult parrots behave. The number of parrots in the aviary grew. By 1999, Rio Abajo Aviary had 54 Puerto Rican parrots. The recovery program was ready for the next part of its plan, releasing adult parrots raised in captivity back into the wild. In 2000, 10 captive-bred parrots were released in El Yunque. It was late spring. The wild chicks had already flown from their nests, and the wild adults were still nearby, where the captive-bred parrots could see them and join them. Iguaca, iguaca, the parrots called as they flew with the newcomers and searched for food. The captive-bred parrots had been trained to find food and avoid hawks, but many were caught by hawks anyway. So before the next 16 parrots were released in 2001, they were given extra training. They heard a hawk's whistle as the cutout shape of a hawk was passed over their cages. They watched a trained hawk attack a Hispaniolan parrot that was wearing a protective leather jacket. In time, the parrots learned to stay still or hide if a hawk was nearby. When these parrots were released, more of them survived in the wild. The scientists were ready to create a second wild flock. In 2006, 22 captive-bred parrots were released in Rio Abajo Forest. The newly released birds formed pairs, found nesting boxes, and raised their chicks. Dozens of the parrots had been released in Rio Abajo since then. And they have begun to spread out through the forest. If you look up from the forest, and you are very lucky, you might catch the bright blue flashes of flight feathers. These are Puerto Rican parrots. They lived on the island for millions of years, and then they nearly vanished from the earth forever. But they are flying over Puerto Rico still, calling, Iguaca, Iguaca. Thank you for listening to today's story. I know it was kind of a long story today. Hopefully you were able to follow along with me and pay close attention. Your goal now is to go to the seesaw activity. There will be a couple questions, and I want you to respond. It looks like I misspelled something on this page. It says replipond. That's supposed to say respond. Sorry about that, guys. So please go to your seesaw activity and respond or replipond to the questions about the story Parrots over Puerto Rico. Thanks, guys. Hope you're all having a great day. Bye-bye.